So we're going to give you a little recruiting update on what is going on with this current 2025 class. Who's going to make a decision soon? Who's close to making decisions? We're just going to kind of run through the big list of the names that everybody's talking about for the Tigers. And I'm going to go ahead and lead it off, Jordan, with four-star Bryce Davis, defensive end, 6'3", 250 pounds. He has a commitment date set for July 20th. So he's kind of in the home stretch of his recruitment. He's down to, I think, Clemson, Duke, Georgia, and South Carolina are his final four that he put out. And he's going to be making a decision on the 20th, on or before the 20th, probably the 20th. He talked to a couple reporters and said that's when his family can all kind of get together and support him when he makes his decision. I read a couple articles and was reading some things about him, how his parents are kind of leaning Duke because they like the academics. His mother is an educator, so academics are really important to her. So obviously Duke is probably ahead in that department than any of the schools I just mentioned. He also grew up a Duke fan, excuse me. So what are your thoughts on Bryce Davis, this upcoming commitment? This could be really big for the Tigers. This could be, one of those huge pieces. This is the number 3 ranked recruit in the state of North Carolina. So this is a huge recruitment. What do you think the Tigers' chances are? And who do you think the Tigers' biggest competition in this recruitment is as we stand today?
Yeah, man. This is a recruitment that's kind of been a long-standing one. They've been building this relationship for a really, really long time. You kind of hit on it a little bit about Duke. Definitely the ties from his parents. They definitely like what Duke is all about from an academic standpoint. But it is they did make it clear, and he did make it clear that it was his decision. So when it comes to who is the biggest threat for the Tigers right now, I think it's obviously Georgia. He did take a visit to South Carolina, enjoyed it. But I do think that it's a battle between Georgia and Clemson, mainly kind of a trend there, as we've seen throughout this recruiting cycle. And this would be a massive addition and kind of put a bow on Clemson's defensive line class. Now, there's a lot of things that are kind of pulling Bryce in multiple different directions. He has a lot of love for Clemson. There are a lot of things pulling him towards Clemson. But there are some factors that, from an outside perspective that are going to make this a more difficult decision. And this is a big recruitment for the Tigers in general because, Grimsley High School, if you guys are familiar and have been following Clemson for a long time, that has been a sort of mixed bag as far as recruiting success. And as of late, it's been a really, really difficult school to land commitments out of. So this would be nice to kind of rebuild those relationships and with that high school and kind of get that foothold really back in that Greensboro area in general. This is a really massive, recruitment, and obviously it'll put a bow. If you are able to land him, it'll put a bow on Clemson's defensive line class. But I do think Clemson has a real shot here. Georgia is always the pull from Georgia is always going to be difficult. As they're they've won 2 of the last 3 national championships. They're winning and being they're arguably the best program in college football right now. So it really just isn't ever going to be easy to pull a kid, especially from a defensive line standpoint, away from the Bulldogs. But I do think Clemson has a real shot here. We'll kind of see where it goes. I think it's still kind of up in the air. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Clemson's got a really good shot there. We'll see if they end up landing them. Let's go ahead and move on to a couple other recruits, and we're going to talk about a trio of wide receivers that Clemson is currently recruiting. First and foremost, we'll talk about Cortez Mills. He's obviously gone through his official visits. We know Oklahoma made a big push. He most recently visited LSU. Clemson is also in the mix. Obviously, he was on hand for the big recruiting weekend that Clemson did this summer. So That's one of the key pieces that Clemson is still after to kind of wrap up this wide receiver room and kind of continue that momentum that we created last cycle when we brought in TJ Moore and Brian Wesco. So Cortez Mills is a big one still out there waiting on his decision. Samari Reed visited Penn State, Kentucky, West Virginia, Ole Miss, and then a newer addition to the recruits for, at least as far as the wide receiver, new addition this week is Dylan Alfred, Ole Miss decommitment. He decommitted back on Monday, like an hour later announced his Clemson offer. So he obviously was on hand for Clemson's spring game. He visited Clemson in the spring. He came back to work out at camp back in June, early June, and go ahead and decommits from Ole Miss. Clemson offers him. There's a crystal ball out there for him for coming to Clemson. So what is your feel right now, Jordan, on this kind of trio of wide receivers? Where does Clemson stand with each of them and their chances of landing one, two, or none of them? What do you think?
Yeah, so Clemson, ideally, they want to land 2 out of these 3 if they can. I think that would be the ideal scenario. And at this point, I believe they're communicating to all 3 of them that, hey, it's first come, first serve as far as spots. Right. I'll start with Cortez Mills. He was at the big official visit weekend on May 31st through early June, and absolutely loved Clemson. It's been a sentimental, program for him for a very, very long time. That visit kind of did everything to reinforce that. And he went as far as to say that Clemson was his leader coming out of that official visit weekend. He took visits to Oklahoma and LSU and Florida as well. And I think that Clemson still is at the very top, but I do think that the visits to Oklahoma and LSU have kind of muddied the waters a little bit. So it's kind of unclear right now, and I don't think anybody really knows where he's leaning at this point. He's set to make his decision on July 1st, so it's going to be a really, really interesting old school recruitment. Back in the day, like you didn't have crystal balls and all that back in, when a big time recruit was about to announce, it was kind of, if you weren't an insider or a writer, you didn't really have an idea. So this is going to be an old school type of announcement, I think, as far as the suspense. So we'll kind of see what happens there. You mentioned Samari Reed. He's a guy that has kind of been flying under the radar as from a recruiting standpoint. He's taking visits to Clemson, Penn State, has been heavily involved as well. I think Clemson is in a good spot, but I do think that Penn State is also a factor, and it really is going to come down to who decides to jump into the boat first. And then I do think that. And then you also mentioned Dylan Alfred, who just recently got an offer after decommitting from Ole Miss. I feel the most. I feel like I have the feel on that one the most. You can kind of connect the dots. He decommits from Ole Miss, gets immediately after his camp visit. You can kind of read between the lines. Clemson was not going to offer if he was still committed to Ole Miss. And if they felt good about where the direction of that recruitment was headed, and he's taking all the steps to, potentially land, end up in this class. So I do like where Clemson sits a lot with Dylan Alfred. Really like his tape, and I think all 3 of these guys, Clemson has a realistic shot of getting. It just kind of depends on who ends up, jumping in the boat, and if you can get 2 out of 3 of them. I think that would be ideal. But obviously, especially with Cortez Mills and Samari Reed, there still is some kind of uncertainty as far as where Clemson sits. As far like they're definitely at the top, but are they number 1? That's kind of the question at this point.
Yeah. they've made the final list for all of those guys. But again, you never know. Recruitment's a very fluid thing. It's a fickle thing. Things can change in a literal instant, especially in today's world of college football, where you have NIL and so many influences out there. Everything's at the click of a button with Twitter and social media and all that stuff. All that stuff plays into factors in of these kids' decisions. So feel pretty good, like you, about where we're at with these three guys. Fingers crossed we can land two of the three, and if we do that, we're in good shape. This class is kind of buttoned up, and Tyler Grisham would have done a really good job if you land two of these three guys in back-to-back classes as far as the wide receiver position goes. So that'll be really good. We'll wait and see what happens there. Continuing along the line of a couple other commits that we're keeping our eye on and some decisions coming up. Kamar Archie, linebacker. Obviously, we talked about him a lot on last week's episode. He's obviously between kind of a Clemson, Michigan, Rutgers type deal. He's obviously from the north. He's more comfortable up there. Obviously, we kind of spelled out all the reasons that he likes Rutgers and the hometown feel and all that kind of stuff. But we're also battling Michigan for that guy. And then Logan Anderson, another linebacker that we recently offered. So what are your feel on these two linebackers? Is Clemson in the back seat looking, in the background looking in on the Kamar Archie recruiting, or what's your kind of take on that? Is he a Rutgers lean? Is he a Michigan lean? What's your kind of feel on that? And then thoughts on Logan Anderson.
Yeah, with Kamar Archie, it is another one of those kind of where does Clemson sit right now? I think they're very squarely, in there, and I would not be surprised if they landed his commitment. But like you said, there is a lot of factors pulling him both to Michigan and Rutgers, and so there is kind of it's still kind of working itself out. So we'll kind of see how. All of this shakes out as he gets closer and closer to making a decision, but it is still kind of up in the air right now. With Logan Anderson, yeah, I couldn't feel any more the opposite. I really like where Clemson sits right now. They have made the push, the biggest push among his suitors. He's been collecting a ton of big time offers at camps recently, kind of been blowing up in this offseason. I really would not be surprised, and honestly, I would be surprised if he didn't end up in this class. I really like where Clemson sits right now.
All right, and then we'll finish up with just some offensive line talk. It's not looking good with these guys, but Hardy Watts, David Sanders Jr., thoughts on those guys, thoughts on what's going on with the offensive linemen in the 2025 class. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly not ideal when you talk about both of these guys. Hardy Watts, set to make his decision same day as Cortez Mills, July 1st. So that's going to be that could be either a really, really good day for the Tigers or a really disappointing one, or maybe somewhat in between or a mixed bag. So it'll kind of a mix, a wide range of emotions we could have coming out of Monday. But yeah, I do think that Michigan is the perceived favorite right now. I can't really say otherwise, but there still seems to be constant communication, and it's not a done deal even as we get closer and closer to his decision. So I'm not saying he's a Michigan lock, but I do think Michigan should be the perceived favorite heading into his announcement. And David Sanders Jr., as I continue to say, it is very much you're battling kind of the money of Tennessee and Ohio State. And I really think those two have, pulled him in that direction a lot more. I don't think Clemson is totally out of it, but it is a very, I would call it an outside shot at this point. So, that is what it is. He was your number one guy, so it's never fun to lose these types of commitments. But again, it's not over. But as we get closer and closer to his decision. And as you know, we get further and further away from that official visit weekend in early June. It does look a little bit bleak. So we'll kind of see how that shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's certainly an uphill battle for both of those individuals in Hardy Watts and David Sanders. Could we possibly land one of the two? I think we could possibly.
Yeah.
But again, uphill battle for both of those guys. Wouldn't be surprised to see us lose out on both of them. To be completely honest, it's probably looking more probable that happens than even we land one of them. So take that what you will. Again, it's recruiting. Anything could change. Who knows what these kids are truly thinking? You see all type of reports, and they say one thing to one reporter and another thing to another reporter. So it's really hard to tell. But I don't know. I don't think we're in good shape with either of those guys, like you were stating, Jordan. But again, we're still in really good shape overall for the class. We got right now, as of today, we have the 7th ranked class in the nation. We got 13 commits so far. So the Tigers have been doing work on the recruiting trail. Everything is trending in the right direction. We just got to stay the course and push the last part of this recruiting cycle to really wrap up this 2025 class in a big way. And, like we just outlined, there's a lot of big time commitments coming up in the next couple weeks. So keep your eyes peeled on Twitter and all the Clemson sites you follow, because news will be coming out. And it'll either be really, really good news for the Tigers, or might be some tough days and some expanding of recruiting boards to come. But we'll see how it goes.
And I do want to point out, because it sounds like we're being all like, oh boy, here we go. But at the end of the day, this is a thing that every program has to go through at some point. You have to, sometimes you don't get all the guys that you had at the top. That's just the reality of recruiting. And Clemson, when they have pivoted and expanded their board, they've done a pretty good job at it. I mean, you guys, hell, I mean, remember when Ray Joseph decommitted a couple cycles ago, and everybody was like, oh man, there goes our receivers. What's happening? And all of a sudden Clemson pivots to this undersized 3-star wide receiver out of Greenville High School named Tyler Brown. And yeah. I mean, if
some
you want
people weren't big fans of him when we brought him on.
Right. So. I mean, and nobody really took it seriously when it happened, but he comes in as a summer enrollee and gave Clemson a big boost in the wide receiver room when they needed it. And he was one of your best receivers last season. And hey, and not to make it a comparison or bash another kid, but the kid that you lost, he had 5 catches this year for Miami. So I mean, I do think it is kind of a perspective thing that sometimes the guys sometimes the guys that you get end up being what's best for you. It's kind of cliche, but it is about the ones you get, not about the ones you don't. So we'll continue to keep track of that and see how, especially with this offensive line board, how it shakes out after these 2 targets come off the board, whether it's in Clemson's favor or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's going to be fun to watch. Again, recruiting is always one of those things that is a very frustrating thing to watch, because you're so high in one moment and then so low in the next moment, just because of the swings in momentum that happen in recruiting in very quick turnaround time. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, keep your eyes out on Twitter. Keep your eyes out on all the Clemson recruiting sites. There will be big news to come, whether that be in favor of our Tigers or in favor of another university. We will get answers in the next couple weeks on a lot of these bigger name prospects that Clemson is in the mix for. So